joining us today on Lattes with Leaders.
I'm Zainab.
And I'm Trisha. And we're excited for you to join us as we catch up over coffee with CEOs and executives from diverse backgrounds and industries.
We seek to discover what is unique about each leader and educate you guys on new and interesting topics. Our conversations seek to enlighten and inspire people from around the world to realize that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things.
When I go into a new organization, I will actually spend my first 3 months, the 30, 60, 90, and that first 30 days just observing and talking to individuals, talking to leadership, and actually understanding what keeps them awake at night. What are the problems that they're facing? What are their expectations from IT? What's the strategic direction of the organization? And how do they envisage that IT may support that better?
Our guest today, Mary-Beth Hosking, is the Global Chief Information Officer for PointsBet, leading a global team to support one of Australia's premier sports betting applications. She has over 17 years of experience leading restructures in multinational organizations, including BP and Specsavers. Prior to her corporate life, Mary-Beth was an accomplished singer and is currently authoring a book explaining what it takes to effect change as a CIO. We're excited to dive into her take on what's going on with the Optus breach and how to develop an information security strategy as a CIO. Well, I'm happy to set the scene. So, Optus recently announced that there's been a security breach affecting almost 10 million customers, which is 40% of Australia's population. It's one of the most serious breaches in Australia's history, and it's for 2 million of those customers, it goes down to the level of personally identifiable data, which is information like passport numbers and driver's licenses. Wanted to hear your reaction to it, Mary-Beth, as a CIO.
As a CIO and a customer, I think, which was most distressing on both parts. And I, from my perspective, these sort of cyber breaches, these sort of attacks are the things that keep me awake at night from an organizational perspective. And there's so many different sorts of breaches and attacks that we need to be considering as CIOs. And I would shudder to think of what it must be like for the team at Optus. And I think from what I've been reading, it also looks like it was possibly a backdoor attack and human error. And that's the thing that you do as a CIO, and if you're a CISO working in the information security space, is you want to secure your environments as much as possible. But you cannot take into account every small possible change that may be happening into your environment and the things that you need to do to ensure that safety. And I think from the last, from within my organization, I look at multiple avenues of awareness and avenues of how potential hackers are going to try to infiltrate my organization. And I think if I were in that Optus space, that would be part of that root cause analysis, not just from a technical perspective, but what is the awareness like in our entire organization? We not only do phishing attacks, which I think everyone is so aware of what a phishing attack is, that for the most part, when you do tests in that space, most of your employees would be passing that. But certainly there will be social engineering attacks, which if you are not aware of what that's going to look like, the people in your organization could fall prey to that as well.
Mary,
and then,
can you? Oh, yeah. Sorry. I was going to say, are you? Could you just explain? Because personally, I'm not aware of the difference between all of those different types of attacks.
There are so many now. This is the thing. These are the things that I think when I first started out in IT that I didn't know or didn't need to know. Now we're in a different world. And just so that everyone is very clear on this call and very clear on this podcast, hackers are an industry. They are big business and they make a lot of money from it. So what you have are things like a denial of service attack or DDoS attack. You may have heard of that. This is where hackers will use brute force to try and bring your websites down, which then has a monetary impact in you not being able to trade. So you will have heard of that, I'm sure. Then you'll have your ransomware attacks. So now, I don't know enough about the Optus breach to know if this was a ransomware attack, but I would suspect it's possible that it is. And what the ransomware attackers will do is they'll get into your system, they'll infiltrate, and then they'll do one of two things. They'll try to exfiltrate data, or they will encrypt your sensitive data so you cannot access it. And then they will request or demand that you pay, and they'll either do that with a cryptocurrency, paying in cryptocurrency to have that information unlocked, or they'll say that they won't put that information onto the dark web. So that's the ransomware side of things. Social engineering is a lot more interesting, and this is where you'll have a hacker that will call in to an organization and they'll represent somebody. They may represent somebody that is in a position of power within your organization, or they may pretend to be a service desk employee and need you to give them your MFA, your multi-factor authentication code, so that they can get into the system, so that they can make sure that everything is running properly. Now, if you're not aware of this and you get a call out of the blue in your organization of somebody that wants your multi-factor authentication codes, you'd never give them to somebody that's on a service desk, because the service desk person will never ask. But if you're not aware of that, then it's the same as if you get that text from your bank saying click this link. Your bank is never going to send you a text with a link. They're never going to do that. But if you're not aware of it, then that is those social engineering type of attacks. You're aware of phishing attacks. A phishing attack is where someone will send an email through. A hacker sends an email through and it'll have a link in it. And that link may have malware in it, or it may have some way of encrypting your system or your device. Again, don't click something you don't expect. And then you'll have backdoor attacks. So the hacker will use combinations of techniques to get into the back ends of your systems. And then they'll send through encryption files. And if you've got very, very high levels of security, things such as Windows Defender, those sorts of things, a SIEM in place in your organization, they will pick up this innocuous activity that is taking place in the background. But I guess my question is, and what I've been thinking about in relation to this Optus breach, these hackers got 10 million records or more, 2 million of those very, very sensitive data. I would wonder just how long they were in the systems for, and how long it took for Optus to actually recognize and see this and then stop this breach. And with a lot of these hackers, they are incredibly sophisticated.
It comes down to the organization itself and taking an approach where they think about the customers and what is the implication if I'm collecting this type of data from customers, right? It almost puts the onus on the organization itself. What are your thoughts on that?
And it's interesting because when this breach took place, the question or the information that was sent out to the consumer was, this is what you need to do. This is not so much, this is what we are doing to ensure security or the security of your data going forward.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's if the customer wants that their data is secure, then how should organizations be thinking about protecting their customers' interests?
When it comes to data, fully encrypt it. Only ask what it is that you actually need. So what you're asking for is that proof of identification. In the case of this sort of Optus issue, they would be asking for proof of identification of who you are, and that's all they should need to know. But if you don't have a driver's license, if you don't have a Medicare card, then you have to provide some other form of photo ID. And almost it starts to sort of lend itself to this idea of having some form of photo ID that isn't one of those, but isn't seen as something that could get you a bank account or something. But if you are in an organization that is collecting this data, it must be seen as PII data, and it must be encrypted. I'm really quite surprised that the data hasn't been encrypted from Optus's perspective, and that would be the first thing you would do.
And Mary-Beth, I think that really leads us into, if you are collecting such data, what, apart from encryption, what other types of protocols do companies put in place to protect themselves from these kinds of hacks?
So you have multi-factor authentication, you have those sorts of things. A lot of the time, you'll have organizations that have, there'll be there's this, I believe, misnomer, which is you should change your password every 30, 60 days when you log into your computer, etc. I actually think that drives a really bad behavior. But if you put multi-factor authentication on, then what it means is that there's two levels, or actually multiple levels of authentication. You could even do things like have YubiKeys, really go old school and use a YubiKey, which gives you an offline security measure where then individuals or hackers, if they were able to get into the back door and they were able to get credentials, they would still have to have a physical device to be able to then authenticate. And so those are some of the things that you would do at a minimum. What else you would do, not so much related to the data, but making sure you have and this might seem a little bit of an odd thing to say, but making sure that you have a really strong disaster recovery plan in place for how you're actually going to circumvent this sort of a breach. Then going in and making sure that once you've done your root cause analysis, which is what they'll be doing at Optus right now, they'll want to know, where did this start from? How did it proliferate our systems so efficiently? Because it really is efficient. How did it do that? And then what are the measures that we need to put in place that will stop this from happening again? Now, if you use tools like, I'm just for the sake of saying a tool, a Microsoft Defender type of tool, it will know what's going on in your systems, and you configure that within your systems to know exactly what's going on. AWS or cloud services have these sorts of things already in place. What you'll find in Windows 11 is as Microsoft gets smarter and smarter with these sorts of breaches, they're actually locking down their operating systems to make them even more secure. So you'll find that Windows 11 is going to be so much more secure than Windows 10, as an example. And so that's what you're seeing as a direct response from the manufacturers of the operating systems that we currently work with. But back onto the disaster recovery side of things, having a really strong disaster recovery plan and being able to initiate that and knowing what the difference is between a natural disaster that's affecting your organization versus a disaster event like a breach, because that is exactly what it is.
I think that's really good context for the episode.
And Mary-Beth, your journey to CIO has not been a traditional one by any means. You have a book, From Singer to CIO, and would love to hear a little bit more about what that journey looked like for you.
Oh, thank you for that. We actually have come up, I've been working with my editor and looking at the updated title, but really in essence, it is that transition from one career path to the other. And so from my perspective, I was in the performing arts for a number of years, and sort of in my early 20s, I decided to change my focus and look at more of a corporate career. So it was a case of trying to identify or linking my transferable skills in a way that would clearly add value to a prospective organization. And it's something that I cover off in the new book, which we've now titled Resiliency, Renewal and Recognition, Reimagining Your Goals, because that's really what it was for me. It was a process of taking one goal and this reimagining what my life would look like if I were to make this change. I began my career in transport and logistics, believe it or not. So another very male-dominated industry. And when I started, I was quite young. And I was able to get involved in a technology department within the transport and logistics space, and without showing my age, it was in the electronic funds transfer space. So FPOS machines, you would know them everywhere now, but automatic teller machines, those sorts of things. And it really was the opportunity to work with the major financial sector, as well as the transport and logistics company, as well as this brand new technology at the time that was coming through. And then I moved more into infrastructure and then into full IT and not in that sort of finance space. So I did move more into that full IT space, and then started to just grow and learn more about IT and the change that is required when you want to embrace IT into your organization. And therefore I sort of became this change advocate within the organization that I worked within.
I was just reading recently Virginia McDowell, who is a non-executive director at Entain and a board member at Global Gaming Women, noted that the gaming industry, although across the board is improving in terms of the number of women in all roles, but is still tremendously underrepresented at the management level. What is your reaction to this? And I want to hear a little bit about your experience in what helped you navigate and achieve the more senior leadership levels in this industry and also through the previous industries that you worked in as well?
It is a confidence thing. And I don't mean confidence from a female perspective. I think it's a confidence thing from industry. We need more women represented at the top tiers so that we build more confidence across industries. Without that, we're always going to be not considered for that CEO role or not considered for that C-suite role. But also it comes down to advocacy and sponsorship. A lot of times you'll hear coaching, mentoring, and those sorts of things, but really you need to have a sponsor, an advocate to help you get to that next step. For me personally, I am quite accomplished across an entire business ecosystem. And that is purely because when I felt that I'd mastered one area in a business and I attempted to push upward, I found that very, very challenging and was not being given the opportunity. So I would move laterally. And I think you'll find a lot of women, a lot of senior women will have moved laterally because they weren't given the opportunity. So it's a case of, do I stay in role where I'm at and I've really mastered this until the next upward movement comes that I may be sponsored for? Or do I look at a lateral move so that I can learn something, remain curious and continue to grow and learn until that next upward opportunity comes my way? That's really what I wound up having to do. And I think you'll find that quite a few women have done the same sort of thing. So quite accomplished across multiple areas in an organization. And then it's that one sponsor that you find that actually helps you push your way through. I was lucky enough in the organization that I'm working in that the hiring manager at the time really wanted a female CIO. He felt that it would bring some balance and some harmony, some cohesion. It would bring a different element of leadership to the organization. So I was lucky in that regard.
And I think this is an important point, Mary-Beth, about where we are in the world today and the focus of organizations in terms of inclusion and diversity. And we have seen a drop off post-COVID, but I think there is still momentum of organizations really setting goals to identify where they want female leadership and honing in on that to make sure that there is that balance. But Mary-Beth, I think one thing that really strikes me about your journey is you are in an industry that, as we said, is quite male dominated, but you're actually in the gambling industry and kind of sports betting space. What's really brought you to that space and what excites you about that industry?
So my background very, very early on when I was singing, to obviously make ends meet, because that's the reality of a singer's life. I did work at some of the major casinos in Australia. So that's my background in that betting space, or in that bricks and mortar space, and working at a casino. Sort of think of your Vegas, Atlantic City, etc. If you're in Australia, you'd be thinking of Crown Casino, Adelaide Casino, etc. So I cut my teeth in that space. And what I always found when I was dealing as a croupier was that there was very little. There was actually no education for a dealer to look at a problem gambler when you're dealing at a table. There's no time, you're pacing a game, you're doing what you need to do. All you're worried about is getting the dollars through the drop box, and that's it. We learned a lot about different cultural nuances and those sorts of things, which I found really fascinating, but nothing around responsible gaming. That was quite some time ago. And then I think over the years, the government has sort of stepped in and said, what are we doing to ensure that, yes, sports betting, it's been around for a very long time. It's now legalized. I mean, back in the day, it was not legalized, and so therefore there weren't any of the precautions or safety measures that are put in place. But now you've got government bodies or regulatory bodies stepping in and saying, well, yes, we understand that it is entertainment, but there's also a monetary repercussion for somebody that might have a problem with that. And so what brought me to this industry, or interested me, was actually the technology. The technology in this space is so cutting edge and interesting.
When everyone else in the business thinks about IT, they think of the reactive side. They're like, oh, we'll get IT to help because there's some issue. But really, the value of IT and the work that you're doing as a CIO is in the proactive side, and really safeguarding the organization before something goes wrong, so that nothing does go wrong. And
it's preventative maintenance, isn't it? So, it's going to the dentist every 6 months instead of waiting till you've got a toothache. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's making sure that you have the right plans in place. That's why those frameworks I talked about earlier, they are so important, because they actually ensure some level of safety and proactivity. But there's also, and this is going to sound really, not strange. I think there'll be people that will listen to this episode and go, oh, I get that. I love auditors. Same way when I was doing software dev, when I was a software dev manager, QA, I loved my QA team, because although the developers at that point were like, oh my God, QA, can QA just leave us alone? And it's like, but what you don't realize with an auditor, with QA, with those sort of functions, they are there to make sure that you are secure, that whatever you're putting out into an environment is fit for purpose. Auditors are going to come in, and you want them to find the gaps, because you are in the forest. So you cannot see the forest for the trees. So the auditors are actually going to step in, and they're going to show you those gaps. So from my perspective, those areas, and again, auditing, any sort of QA type of function, is going to give you the ability to be more proactive.
So once you've identified those gaps and areas of opportunity where you can, solidify your approach and build on a strategic roadmap to improve the tech infrastructure in the business, what's the next step? How do you firstly develop this strategic roadmap and determine what's important for the business? And then how do you convince the leadership and the board members on the amount of spending that needs to go into to delivering a secure and safe infrastructure for the business?
And Trisha, I think that is such a great question, because Mary-Beth, I'm sure that you have this, but as a service for the organization, you're basically convincing other board members to spend their money with you in what you think needs to be done, right? So there's the IT budget, and then there's the IT budget that's business unit driven.
Well, that's right, and they are very, very different. So depending on the organisation, and I've worked in a number of organisations where security, as an example, is it's seen as an insurance policy, and so it's like, we don't really need to spend that money, do we? We could put that over here, repurpose it for something else, and it's only when a disaster event actually happens, that they sit back and then it's that, oh, IT, we need you now. We actually have seen it with COVID. In fact, I don't know if your organizations have seen that, but I have seen that with a number of legacy organizations that I have colleagues and associates that work for, that they were, before COVID hit, it was, we need to beef up our VPN. We need to make it so that individuals can work from home so that we've got a little bit of flexibility. And businesses were of the opinion, well, if I can't see you in the seat, that presenteeism piece, if I can't see you in the seat, then you're not actually doing your job. Whereas in IT, we've been working remote since the early aughts. So really businesses will repurpose funding for security, but it's when that event takes place that they actually sit back and then realize. But then that is also short-lived, right? So we're also coming out of this space of COVID. At the beginning of COVID, money was thrown at IT just to make organizations flexible enough that people could work from home so they could continue trading. Nobody really thinks about IT until it falls apart. And rightly so. That's how it should be. But if we go back to the original question, which was, how do I go about pulling together that strategic direction? What does that look like? When I go into a new organization, I will actually spend my first 3 months, the 30, 60, 90. And that first 30 days, just observing and talking to individuals, talking to leadership, and actually understanding what keeps them awake at night. What are the problems that they're facing? What are their expectations from IT? What's the strategic direction of the organization? And how do they envisage that IT may support that better? Now, in a purely tech company that I'm in now, it's a slightly different conversation because it's all tech. So it really is how supportable is it? How performant is it? And those are the sorts of questions that come forward. Once I have that and I start to gather an idea of what the pain points are, what the strategic direction is of the organization, how I'm going to underpin that, then I will start to pull together what the strategy will look like. And once that's done, I'll socialize that. And I spent a significant amount of time in my first 90 days with current organization socializing the roadmap, what that would look like, how we would achieve that, and what are the key pillars that would support the organization and support the organization's key pillars. Because those pillars are going to be slightly different. Of course, you'll have a similar cost pillar within the IT frame as you do at the strategic or the business strategy level, but making sure that those things do interface and that I have buy-in. That's the most important piece. There's no point having a roadmap, a strategy, if you do not have buy-in at all levels. So from my perspective, I spend a lot of time socializing that with senior executives, with members of the board, making sure that they were happy with what it was that that I would be implementing with my team. And then I fed that back through my team. And then I took them through a roadshow of what that looks like. And then obviously it's at the strategic level and then task level that sits in underneath that, or those main areas of improvement that would need to be focused on. That's how I approach that with the organization. Obviously, I have a budget, and that budget gets set. When I started with the organization, the budget was set, but it's about having the convincing conversations with board and executive. And for me, it's showing that anything in the vendor space, I will always negotiate with the vendor to ensure that we have the right price, the price fits in within the budget, but also that you get the right level of support. And then compensation that drives off of that. So from my perspective, it really is that socialization, working with the executive to ensure that whatever it is that I'm putting forward is going to take the business forward in its trajectory. I usually only look at sort of that 12 to 18 months. I will revisit the strategy when it hits that sort of 10 or 11 month space. That's where I'm at the moment. Revisiting. Is it still on track? Does it need to have some course correction? Where are we at? Gone are the days for me where I'll put together a 5-year strategy that just does not exist in IT anymore. You are 18 months to 2 years. Does my organization and the way that the organization is structured support this strategy? Is this the right way to structure the organization? Is this the right way to retain team members? All of those sorts of things have to go into that decision making around what goes into the strategy at a point in time. But as a senior leader, as a CIO, I'm always revisiting that roadmap and ensuring that we are hitting the milestones of that roadmap, but also, is it still pertinent to the business? Does it need to be course corrected to support the business going forward?
And Mary-Beth, on that note, so where you are having to influence business areas and have some level of engagement to get the buy-in to support this strategy, how do you do that if the things that you're proposing maybe are quite technical? So we've talked a little bit about ransomware, we touched on kind of the cybersecurity space. How do you actually translate those quite technical and I think to some extent abstract infrastructure details to your colleagues who maybe don't have an understanding or an appreciation for that technical background?
Well, you've got two approaches, don't you? You either put the fear of God into them and give them details of what other organisations have experienced if they didn't do this, or you can actually sort of speak to them on a level that they do understand. So from my perspective, building a business case, and then in that business case, I don't get technical in that space. Somebody at the executive level doesn't need to know, how many servers are we purchasing, what we're purchasing from a perspective of, the cloud infrastructure, what we're going to be doing in that space. They don't need to know that. What you need to do is you need to build a narrative around what it is that you're doing based on the problem that you're trying to solve. So that is, it is storytelling at the end of the day. So it is basically taking them through the problem statement and the problem that they are experiencing, or what they understand the problem to be, and then how you're going to address that problem, but in layman's terms. If it's a security piece, we're going to use best practice to implement the strategic approach, and we're going to use specific tools with which to do that. This is what it's going to cost. This is the return on investment, and this is how we believe, or how I believe, that it's going to shore us up for the future. So it really is about building that narrative. I tend to not use fear as a tactic because I just don't think that works. I use that idea of building a very strong business case, removing the tech from it, because at the end of the day, it comes down to, can you achieve the objective? What's it going to cost me to achieve the objective? I don't necessarily care how you achieve the objective, but that the objective is going to be achieved. And is there going to be a return on investment? If there's not, why not? And those are the things that I focus on when I build that narrative out for the executive.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that is a skill, particularly at the level that you're at, that you need to be able to have to be successful in your role, right? Like,
you need to know your audience, right? You just cannot go into it and sit there saying, I come from a change background. So for me, it's about that. I need to take you on a journey with me. I cannot take you on a journey if I'm just bamboozling you with technical talk. You're not going to understand it. And what it does do, I actually think, is, and I think that technology leaders have, not that you're to blame for this, that's the wrong word. How would I say this? If you are not having conversations at that business layer in a way that the executive can understand, executive starts to feel a bit, what's the word? They lose faith in what it is that you're saying because they don't understand what you're saying. So you need to bring it down to a level, or bring it up to a level, however you want to say that everyone understands exactly what it is that you're going to do. And at the end of the day, everyone understands a milestone, they understand a budget, they understand a deliverable. So if you can talk in those terms, that's really important.
And thanks so much, Mary-Beth, for sharing that with us today. I found it so engaging and informative to learn more about what goes through a CIO's head, what keeps you up at night, and particularly all of the pieces around how you're trying to keep your organization ahead of the curve in terms of the technology that you're supporting with. Don't forget to check out our more recent episodes where we connect with global female CEOs to explore how to make it to the top. Whether your ambition is to be an executive at a corporate, build a franchise, or pivot your traditional career, check us out. Be sure to give us a like or follow on LinkedIn, TikTok, or Instagram at Lattes With Leaders.
Our mission is to hear the voices of women from around the world. So if you're an avid listener and want your voice heard through our platform, please reach out.